Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar where we'll talk about mandatory face coverings, specifically on public transport, the exemptions to wearing these and some of the challenges associated with it. Good morning, my name is Emma Scott and I am the Operations Manager at Disability Equality Scotland. And I'm joined today by my colleague Ali Bruce, who'll be helping to facilitate the session from behind the scenes. Now, some of you may be very familiar with Zoom over the last few months and others will still be finding their feet. So let me just run through how today's session will run and how you can interact with us. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, just type your question into the Q&A box in the bottom panel, and as time allows, the speakers will address as many questions as they can during the Q&A session. If you'd prefer, you can ask a panelist a question directly. Please say so in the Q&A box and we can select you to speak. At this point, you'll have to manually unmute yourself to be heard. If you're having any technical difficulties, please type the issue you're having in the comments box and Ali will do his best to try and help you resolve that. Today we have a live captioner with us and the link for this has been posted in the chat box below. This will take you to a separate website called streamtext.net, where you can adjust the accessibility features such as the font size, the text and the background colour. We're also joined today by Maya Stone, who's come to us from Sign Language Interactions, and she will be providing British Sign Language support for us today. We're also recording today's webinar and we'll be able to share the link with you afterwards. And also we've prepared a very short evaluation survey that will be sent to you after today's event. Please do take the time to give us some feedback as it helps us to prep for future webinars. Also, if you're having any trouble hearing me or any of the other panelists today, then please let us know in the comments box and we'll do our best to try and resolve that for you. So to set today in context, we have been engaging with our membership over the last few months on various impacts of COVID-19. And after the introduction of mandatory face coverings, we ran one of our weekly polls on this topic just to find out more about what our members thought. We had quite a significant response, but most concerning for us was the number of disabled people who were worried about being judged for not wearing a face covering. And there were equally high numbers of disabled people who said they were specifically afraid of being a victim of hate crime as a result of not wearing a face covering in public. So with this feedback from our membership, Disability Equality Scotland launched a public awareness campaign where we were reminding people that not everyone can wear a face covering and that some tolerance should be shown. But unfortunately, we're hearing a lot of stories from disabled people being refused entry into shops or onto public transport and being challenged by other members of the public or by staff for not wearing a face covering. So today I will facilitate a very short discussion about some of the key issues that came out of our weekly poll before taking questions from the floor. But let me start today just by introducing our panel of speakers. We're joined by Robert Burns, who's the Stakeholder Engagement Officer from First Bus. Hi, Robert. Seamus Campbell, who's our Customer Service Director from Northlink Ferries. We have Constable Stephanie Rose from the Safer Communities team at Police Scotland. And we have our very own James Davidson, who is the Communications and Research Coordinator at Disability Equality Scotland and our resident expert on inclusive communication. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining us this morning. So as I've said, face coverings became mandatory in Scotland on public transport on the 22nd of June and then on the 10th of July became mandatory in shops. But we also know that not everyone can wear a face covering and there are some exemptions. So people are exempt if they have a disability or a health condition that means they can't put a covering on. They're exempt if a covering would cause them severe stress or distress. If they need to communicate with someone who relies on lip reading, or if there's a reasonable need for them to eat, drink, or take medication when they're out and about. So our research has found that disabled people are being confronted by members of the public for not wearing a face covering. Now, as an organisation, Disability Equality Scotland obviously think this behaviour is completely unacceptable and it must not be tolerated. So this led us to launch a social media campaign the aim really was to raise awareness with the general public that not everyone can wear a face covering. And we also made up our own exemption cards. Now, I'll preface this discussion today by stating that as a disability organisation, obviously we don't think that disabled people should have to prove their exemption or explain themselves to anyone. But the feedback we're getting suggests that something tangible like a card or a lanyard gives people a bit more confidence to make journeys. So I'll start today by finding out a little bit more about the exemptions and the message of exemptions. So Robert, can I come to you first as representative of First Bus? Can you tell us a little bit more about what First Bus are doing to promote the messages around face coverings and specifically about exemptions?
Hi Emma, thanks very much for having me first of all. First Bus, being a public transport operator, obviously falls under the terms that Scottish Government guidance indicates that the wearing of a face covering on public transport, and that includes all of our buses, is mandatory, and therefore it is a requirement if you're able to wear a face covering when you travel with us. However, we are mindful of the exemptions that there may be in play for people that have difficulty with wearing a face covering, and we've got that messaging in mind by advising to a wider travelling population that not everyone is required to wear one, and if they've got a medical exemption to do so. And we support that messaging through our social media posts, on bus messaging, which within our keeping everyone safe messaging posters on board our fleet. And more importantly, we are mindful that if you do have an exemption, and in the case where a driver may ask why someone isn't wearing a face covering, that people may not necessarily want to broadcast their status exemption to the rest of the bus. So at First Bus, we've already introduced a similar Better Help to Travel card, which has a specific message that when the holder shows it to the driver, it simply says, "I am exempt from wearing a face covering." And it's designed to be discreet and shown just alongside your travel pass, so that you don't have to say anything to the driver. The driver visually sees the message, and you can just discreetly walk on and take your place. So that's the number of different options that we're doing to try and make it as easy, instill confidence in people that may be exempt from wearing a face covering, while at the same time feeling that they're not going to be singled out when they come on. We've put measures in place to try and make it as simple as possible for everyone to travel.
Okay, great, thanks. And Seamus, if I can ask you, what's the situation at Northlink? Do you have a similar way of promoting an exemption card?
At Northlink Ferries, I suppose, quite unique to a lot of other transport operators, where we provide accommodation as well as restaurant facilities on board passenger vessels. The approach we've taken is some soft social media awareness in promoting the partnership we have with Neatbox Welcome. For example, we are seeing the cards being used, which we accept. The Thistle card, for example, our staff are basically, if the challenge, every staff member is asked to ask if someone approaches without a face covering. The question is asked, or passengers are directed to do so, and the only prompt we require is, "I am exempt." That is all. That is all we require. We will not challenge any further as to why they're exempt. That is not our place. But what we do encourage them to do then, we have quite a unique risk assessment, and a weekly risk assessment review takes place, and this gets passed up through Transport Scotland, who take advice then from Health Protection Scotland. So we will encourage the 2-metre physical distancing mantra to passengers who are exempt. although we're not going to police them in such a way where we're going to make them feel uncomfortable. And if they have any form of identification on board the ship, I'm looking in at the moment, maybe we're a wee bit slower than others, but we are looking at adopting, say, the sunflower lanyard system. We also have staff who are exempt from wearing them. And for them, we have a challenges from passengers towards staff. I saw mention just a wee ago in the chat about the UN Sky badges. I have directed my staff to go there, but we'll do something formal for them as well. So we have in the restaurants which are exempt from face coverings due to eating and drinking. But again, queuing, we expect the face coverings to be worn with those that can. Again, if they're exempt, if they let one of the members of staff know, that member of staff will guide passengers round about the exemption to the 2 meter rule. Not explaining why, because that's not, we don't feel that's a requirement. So it's basically what we're trying to do is make the journey as comfortable as possible, for all passengers, but in particular those that might feel nervous about travelling with us. So quite a few, quite unique, as I say, by providing accommodation, people sitting about in lounges, etc. But and we're seeing public compliance around about 99%. But certainly the mantra we're holding as a company is do not challenge when exemption is mentioned.
Okay, great, thanks, Seamus. Robert, can I come back to you then at First Bus? And what are your staff trained to do? Will people be allowed to travel if they're not wearing a mask?
So First Bus's policy is while the use of face coverings is mandatory, our driver's primary objective is to continue to drive the bus and get everyone to their destination safely. However, they are advised to encourage and educate. So if anyone does try to board the bus, again, if the exemption card isn't shown, the driver will politely remind you're required to wear a face covering. If someone says they have an exemption but they don't have the card yet, then that's fine, they will be allowed to travel. For people that maybe aren't wearing a covering, but they do not have a medical exemption, the driver doesn't have the power to refuse them to travel, but we do back that up with a slip that's issued to them, reminding them that it is a government requirement to wear a face covering on public transport, that there may well be fines incurred if they're caught not doing so. And we also further back that up if we get intelligence from our drivers, service users, and elected stakeholders that there may be hotspot pockets in areas where uptake of the wearing of face coverings is maybe lower in some areas than others, then we can send our street team out to do some spot checks and again just reinforce that education message that you should be wearing a face covering on board.
Great. Thanks, Robert, that's great. I suppose one of the other things that came out of our poll was obviously the large number of disabled people who have this fear of being judged for not wearing a face covering and are very concerned about being a victim of hate crime as a result. And we have lots of examples of where this has happened, and I'll just read out some of the comments that we've received to put things in a little bit of context. Somebody said, people judge me for not wearing a mask. People make me feel like I'm a bad person or that I don't care. I'm not going to explain myself to every person. It's just not fair. Someone else says, I suffer from anxiety and panic attacks and I really can't wear a mask. I get abused on the bus when I'm not wearing a mask and it makes me feel even more stressed. And someone else says, I shared a post on my Facebook page saying I was being unfairly judged for not wearing a mask. I'm young and people don't see my health issues. I was verbally attacked, told I would be slapped and to suck it up and get a mask on. Stephanie, can I come to you at this point? Can you maybe say a little bit more about the ways in which hate crime could manifest itself in these circumstances?
Yeah, Emma, thanks very much, and I also want to thanks for allowing us to take part today. If I could just start with re-emphasising the Chief Constable's position. He's been very consistent throughout coronavirus response, that it's clear that the Police Scotland are actually, we ask people to take their personal responsibility to do the right thing, and to remember that the purpose of the measures is to aid the collective effort to stay safe, protect others, and also save lives by preventing the virus from spreading. So our initial response is always that we're asking people to do the right thing. We've had a kind of agreed process in place where our first response is always to engage with people, to chat to them, to explain the legislation and the guidance, to try and encourage them to comply with it. And we only use enforcement as a last resort because it is a very difficult time for everybody, and we hope that by explaining about face coverings that people will then understand why they've been asked to wear them. We are also putting out a lot of messaging about exemptions, because just like you're saying, you've obviously spoken to us direct, and a number of other organisations have reported to us that people are very fearful and worried when they're going out. The position is very much that police officers will not ask you to prove your exemption. We also will not make you carry anything to prove your exemption, but we do understand that some people feel a lot more confident when they have something on them, that rather than getting into a debate or the discussion, that's something they can show, and it does give them confidence. And if they were to show that to a police officer, then we would obviously take that into consideration, but it's absolutely their decision, and it's their individual kind of, what they feel most comfortable with. With regards to hate crime, a lot of the examples you've just read out, very much, if we were to get more information on them, there's a good chance that a lot of them could constitute a hate crime. So a hate crime is when you're targeted, if we're specifically talking about disability hate crime today, you're targeted because a person is showing hostility, prejudice. The kind of formal words are malice and ill will, but if they're showing hostility and prejudice towards you because of your disability, then that's something you can report to the police, and that we would look at how we can investigate that and provide you a positive response to that. We've talked about hate crime for a long time. The impact of hate crime is huge on people, and that fear that you talk about, there's a lot of people who are fearful. They might not even have an incident happen to them, but they actually don't even go out their house. So if we kind of go back to that, our Chief Constable's kind of position, if everybody's doing the right thing and everybody's behaving appropriately, then that would reduce that fear for people, and that we're kind of really hoping that people will get a better understanding of the exemptions.
Thanks, Stephanie. James, can I bring you in at this point? Can you maybe say a little bit more about what we've been doing as an organisation in terms of the feedback you've been getting from case studies and also with the Safety Hub?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So at Disability Equality Scotland, we worked in partnership with Stephanie and Police Scotland to develop the Disability Safety Hub. So this is a website to raise awareness of hate crime and how to report it. Along with information on hate crime, we're also updating the hub with the latest resources on how to stay safe during this time. So one such resource is a mental wellbeing guide. So on the hub, you can also find various resource categories, including useful contacts, education, training, and case studies. So in reference to case studies, as Emma mentioned, we've had a lot of calls and messages from disabled people to state that they have been subject to abuse during lockdown. So to raise awareness of this, we recently put out a call to action to our members to share their stories, which we could then use as case studies. So the reason for using case studies is that we feel that that gets the message across in a relatable manner. So if you go to our Safety Hub website, you can view the case studies and you can share them to raise further awareness. So the web address for our Safety Hub is www.disabilitysafety.scot, and we can post a link in the chat. So at the moment we've got 3 case studies on the website, but we are looking to increase the number of case studies. So if anyone would like to share their experiences, please get in touch with us and we can add that to the Safety Hub.
Yeah. Great, thanks James, that's really helpful. Can I come back, Robert, to you? Are you aware of any incidents that happen on your services, whether passengers or staff are challenging folk who are not wearing a face covering? Is that something that you're aware of, and what do you do about it?
Yeah, so we are aware. I would say that the most kind of prevalent awareness that we have is through interaction on social media, whereby we will, it tends to come on the back of promoting the wearing of face coverings. So we'll do a social post to say, remember, you must wear a face covering when you travel with us. And then there will be, for example, on Facebook, you have the comment feature underneath, and we have to effectively interact with people, and they will advise that, you know, oh, well, I was on a bus and I saw someone not wearing a face covering. Now, it may well be that that person's had an exemption, and they just don't necessarily understand to make a connection that it could be someone that's discreetly shown something to the driver and they're just not aware of it. However, in certain routes where it has been brought to our attention, where there may be a number of people been present on board that haven't worn a face covering, that's where we send our street team out to basically, and it's not planned, it's basically on a kind of turn up and check basis. We will just go into pockets of Glasgow, for example, whereby they will spend a few hours on buses, waiting at bus stops, at terminal points, so that we're capturing bus use in a number of different ways. So, you know, partway through the route, at a terminus, a busy thoroughfare partway through the route, so that we are reinforcing the message in a helpful way as best as we can. And what I would say is that while initially uptake on the wearing of face coverings was fairly high but could have been better, the fact that it's been extended to retail more in recent times, there has been a kind of natural upscale in people complying. So rather than it just being through one form, such as mode of transport, the fact that it's now a requirement in more sectors, certainly we've seen an upsurge in the number of people complying now, because effectively the vast majority of people use public transport to get to work or get to retail. So if they go hand in hand, that compliance rate has improved. It should really just be, if you're going out to do something and you're in an enclosed space, wear a face covering if you can.
Yeah, great. And Seamus, if I can come back to you, obviously things on board are slightly different, but again, what are staff, obviously you've said already the staff aren't to challenge anyone, but what happens if you see challenges happening between passengers? Are the staff trained to deal with that?
Yes, you know, again, unique situation in ferries. Over the years, we've learned how to diffuse a lot of situations between passengers in normal, well, the old normal times, shall I say. The staff are encouraged to facilitate debate, shall we say, between passengers. We're fortunate where we can work, and unlike Robert, you know, the 1 meter is hard enough, let alone the 2, when we have the luxury of the 2 meters. Although we're currently working to the 1 meter in general areas, apart from point of sale for staff. So the challenges are coming in. As I mentioned briefly earlier, the most notable challenge we've had is staff not wearing them. You know, but you know, we'll maybe come back to that one later on. And when it comes to, you know, the requirement, we're encouraging staff not to wear the masks and maintain the 2 meter distance on screens, etc. But where we have had one live case and how we would manage non-compliance, again, every passenger that travels with us must give us their name and address and contact details. So that helps. This is regardless of track and trace or whatever, but this is just a standard we're required to provide for the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. So we had one issue on the short sea crossing, Caithness to the Orkney Islands, whereby a couple travelling point blank refused to follow the mandated government advice. The staff did challenge them. They stated they were not exempt from wearing them, and they would not follow any rules from the Scottish Government. So basically what we've done, we have a system of reporting passenger behaviour into, I receive them, so I assess them. So we've written, we will write, we have written to these passengers in particular and reminded them of their obligation under the mandatory rules, and if they weren't willing to accept them, we would consider their right to travel with us. So very unique in that we can actually police it ourselves. However, if they were to come back and say they were going to comply and then they did the same again, we might just let Police Scotland know at a local level. And then we wouldn't be necessarily expecting anything to be dealt with, but just sharing the information with them. And that, I suppose we're lucky in that sense where we have the time to do that. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Seamus. So Stephanie, if I can come back to you, what should people do if they do see anybody being challenged on public transport or elsewhere? What are the kind of steps they can take?
So we would ask that people don't directly challenge other members of the public. If there's something giving you cause for concern, if you're in a shop, can you, in the first instance, let the shop staff know? That may reduce the kind of instance where people are challenging each other and creating kind of tensions within premises. So in the first instance, we would ask that they make the shop staff aware. If they're massively concerned that somebody's not wearing a mask, then it'd be up to the shop staff to ask the person, have you considered the kind of face coverings, and then the person can choose to disclose what information they want. They're more likely to speak to a shop staff member than they are to tell another random kind of member of the public. So report anything immediately to the shop staff. So if you do see something occurring, do that. On the transport, again, the transport staff, have links into being able to maybe contact the police through their central control centres, etc. They have their own policies in terms of when they need to contact the police, how they go about doing that. Whereas somebody in the midst of being challenged might not have the confidence or ability to be able to lift the phone and phone the police direct themselves. So we would always ask in the first instance that if you are being challenged and you are being targeted, then you get yourself to a safe place and you make that known to initially the staff as quickly as possible. And if you feel that there is a criminal matter there and a matter for the police, then you contact us. And it might be that the shop staff choose to do that if they feel there's a criminal aspect. So there's a few things in there, but really tell somebody what's happening and try and seek some support.
Absolutely. And I think for us, it's all about trying to raise that awareness that if something does happen, it's important to report it to somebody. Great. So can you say a little bit more, Steph, about the kind of the way the police are monitoring or even enforcing the face coverings?
Yeah, as I said before, enforcement's very much a last resort for us. It is a very difficult time. There's also quite often changes in the legislation and the guidance, and so sometimes there is genuine errors. And so we always work with we call it the 4 E's. So the first one, as I explained earlier, was to engage with the person. The second E is explain. So we would explain the guidance, the legislation, we would explain why it's there. It's actually to save lives and protect people. We would then encourage them to voluntarily comply with that. So we've got several stages before we would come to enforcement. And enforcement generally initially is through fines. And there's a kind of a gradual scale of fines, different costs. If it's your first fine, second fine, third fine, and all that information's available on the government website. So it's very much a last resort that we want to fine anybody or charge anybody with breaches of the coronavirus legislation. But if somebody's reporting a hate crime or a disability hate crime, verbal abuse, assaults, then that's very much our normal process, is that we would take those reports, investigate them, and seek to get enough evidence to charge the person. So the coronavirus legislation is slightly different in that we are trying to work with the public to do the right thing. But if there's criminality attached in terms of verbal abuse and assaults, then we will police that normally.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Obviously, one of the biggest things that we're hearing about from our membership is that face coverings present significant challenges to people with hearing impairments who rely on sort of non-verbal cues, facial expressions, least of all lip reading. James, can I come to you and ask you to say a wee bit more about the kind of feedback that we're getting from our members and what some of those communication barriers are?
Yeah, of course. So a number of our members have highlighted the communication barriers that are created by face coverings. And I have some direct quotes that we received recently from our members. So first one here, I rely on facial expression and lip reading. I do not object to wearing a mask, but need others to make an adjustment for me. The guidance is poor. The second quote, face coverings muffle your voice. And I find that when walking my guide dog, you have to speak louder, as the dog does not pick up on commands when using your normal voice level. And lastly, we need high quality, comfortable, transparent face masks, widely available and used as soon as possible. Until this is done, huge numbers will continue to suffer severe communication disadvantage, which will impact on social inclusion, workplace productivity, and mental well-being. So to give some context to this, 1 in 5 people in Scotland have some level of hearing loss. And in terms of hard of hearing, there's around 700,000 people in Scotland. So people who are deaf and have hearing loss rely on visual clues for effective communication. That includes body language, gestures, facial expressions, and lip reading. Face coverings also reduce the quality and clarity of speech. So there are a number of organisations that are producing transparent face coverings with clear panels, which makes it possible to see the mouth. Although feedback is that clear panels can often steam up, which prevents lip reading and seeing facial expressions. As well as masks with clear panels, there's also face shields and visors that are available. But as we've mentioned in terms of the exemptions, it's worth stating again that the exemptions are in place. So if you're traveling or providing assistance to someone who relies on lip reading or facial expressions to communicate, you're not required by law to wear a face covering. And Emma, you mentioned this as well at the beginning. You do not have to prove to anyone that you're exempt, but if it would make you feel more confident in public, then we do have our exemption cards that are available on our website as well. And they're available at disabilityequality.scot.
Thanks, James. That's really helpful, and I think it probably leads us into some of the questions that we've been getting so far today. And I wonder then if I could ask Robert and Seamus to say a little bit more about what guidance that you're giving to staff around communicating with those people who rely on lip reading. Robert, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Emma. And with First Bus, it's actually not really an issue at all for the driver to assist in terms of lip reading. Particularly in Glasgow, as many service users will already be aware, Glasgow's buses are already fitted with safety screens, and those were in place even prior to COVID coming along. So it's for Glasgow's operations, it's very much part and parcel of being the role of a bus driver that you communicate through a safety screen. And as COVID has come along, we have extended the fitting of safety screens to our other operations in the east of Scotland and Aberdeen. The fact, though, that they are clear perspex and the driver can still clearly see through each of the screens means that anyone that does require the aid of lip reading, the driver can still communicate very clearly with them. So in that respect, it's not really an issue for any of our employees to engage with anyone that requires assistance in that way.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Seamus, can I ask you the same? And what's Northlink doing in terms of communicating with people who rely on lip reading? Oh, can't hear you, Seamus. That's you.
Just unplug. I am in an open office at the moment. Sorry, I had to find another location. You got me all right now?
But yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Just like Robert, the fitting of screens was one of the priorities. But again, coming back to the physical distancing and the 2 meters, by maintaining the 2 meters at the points of sale and points of service, it negates the need for the staff to wear the face covering. And that was one of our key priorities. And that's something I fought for when we were drawing up the risk assessments, is that we will not fall to the 1 meter at points of service. No need for the staff to wear them, and we kept it as simple as we could. So, but everything else is screens, much the same as what Robert mentioned earlier on.
Great, thank you.
I can give you a little on police health. Sorry, we've put guidance out to our officers regards to considering accessibility. So when we are approaching people, we've asked them to consider disability under any form, not to make presumptions about why people might or might not be wearing face coverings. So that kind of general guidance went out to all of our staff across the whole of Scotland, including things like telling them that they couldn't ask people to prove their exemption. But as part of that, we also talked about police have kind of 2 forms of the protective equipment. If we're in full protective equipment because there's a suspected or confirmed case of COVID, then our officers aren't able to remove that, and it's not clear face masks at this time. But what we've done is we've asked, given them guidance to consider gestures, writing things down, just really working with alternative methods of communication that works for that individual. We've also asked them to ask the individual what works best for them. So that guidance is going out. If they're in a situation where they're going into a shop or on transport and they're just wearing the basic face covering, we've asked them to then look at how they can remove that. So can they step outside the shop? Can they step outside the bus or transport? Can they create their social distance and then remove their face covering to allow that person to lip read or look at facial expressions? And it's not just people with hearing loss. There may be people with other disabilities or neuroatypical who are quite affected by the sight of people wearing face masks. In actual fact, that ability to find the space to socially distance and remove it could calm a situation and a person right down. So we've put direct guidance out to our officers on considering that when they engage with people and considering alternative methods of communicating to ensure that they can give the person the best service.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Just one question that was part of our poll response, and maybe Robert and Seamus, this is maybe one for you. Is there a reason why face coverings are not handed out on public transport?
Yeah, purely on health and safety grounds. But we will, if somebody is stuck, we will. It's not common practice, but it's basically on risk assessment, say health and safety grounds.
Robert, is it
Yes, so First Bus just have a slightly different view that the onus is on the passenger to wear a face covering, and that journey pretty much starts even before you start using the bus. So we're of a view that if you're making plans to travel on a service, you should already have a face covering. We don't have any plans to provide face covering, but we believe through the continual education, encouragement and engagement on social feeds and through our travel planning applications where there's key messaging, there really should be no reason for people not to understand that key message when they're planning their journey. Before they actually approach the bus.
Absolutely, great. Thank you, Robert. We know at the moment there's obviously exemption cards that are in circulation, and there's lots of different ways that you can get hold of these. Are all these different types recognised? I mean, would First Bus accept a sunflower lanyard, for example, or one of our own cards?
Yeah, so First Bus are not signed up as part of the Sunflower scheme just yet, but it's something we're definitely looking at. In terms of other schemes, so for example, disability Equality Scotland's exemption card, that's something we would accept. And another one that's come to recent attention and acceptance is the Thistle Assistance Scheme as well. So it doesn't have to be a First Bus branded exemption card. Common sense should prevail that if you have a card that says you're exempt, then the driver will accept that that is the case.
Great. We have had a question, somebody asking if we've got any idea of the percentage of people that stated that they would prefer to have a card or something to show their exemptions. I don't think we do. We certainly don't as an organisation have any idea of the numbers, but I think it's safe to say that we've been inundated with phone calls from people requesting exemption cards. So there's definitely a desire to have something. And I think it's like you're saying, Robert, something tangible to have. And Steph, you mentioned this as well, is great for confidence. And that's what we're trying to promote at this point, because I think we find that a lot of people are too scared to go out because they're afraid to be challenged. So actually having something tangible makes a real difference to them. But again, somebody has questioned whether people would abuse that sort of system and have or carry an exemption card to maybe get out of using a face covering, because obviously they are uncomfortable. Nobody enjoys wearing them. But has anybody come across anything like that? Any abuse of the system, and how would that be policed, as it were?
Sorry, when you go, Robert.
I would say because it's not officially means tested, it's more a tool that we have created just simply to provide those that require the exemption. You know, we're not in the business of going around saying, well, you need to prove that status sort of thing. It's there as a help mechanism. The flip side of that is there's nothing to stop someone from just downloading and printing off a card and then using that status. But in general terms, through the collective ownership of doing the right thing, we haven't really come across any obvious or active examples where it is actually being abused. And the fact that it looks roughly about 85 to 90% of passengers on the majority of our routes are already wearing face coverings. And then if you take into account around about maybe 10% of our passenger base at least is you know, maybe has a genuine exemption status, then that, you know, the simple numbers are that compliance generally is very high, and if there are any instances of abuse of that mechanism, then it is very much in the minority.
Great, thanks, Robert. Steph, did you want to come in on that very quickly?
Yeah, I was probably going to say a very similar thing to Robert. We don't have mechanisms in place to identify anybody kind of fraudulently using cards or systems. I think what we would say is that, you know, there is a lot, we've talked a lot about the incidents that happen that are quite negative and create fear, but we have also seen, as Robert says, a really good compliance with legislation and guidance in so many areas. And, you know, the vast majority of people who are able to wear face masks appear to be doing so at this time. And I think, you know, watching things happening, you know, across the UK and in Europe, people are keen to kind of not push the efforts back. And so generally the positive is that there has been a general approach to people wanting this to get better, and so doing the right thing. And generally they have. So if there were people who were trying to trick the system, they're probably in a very, very low minority. And so therefore we maybe wouldn't know about them because it's not going to come across the desk of the police every single day. But it's something we will monitor for, definitely, because the scheme only works if everybody's kind of pulling towards the collective effort. And if everybody does that, then the exemptions are a small number and they are a minority, and people will hopefully eventually get that education, and we'll have a system that works really well for everyone.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephanie. I'm conscious of time, everyone. Thank you for all your contributions this morning. Thank you to all of our panelists and speakers, and for all the questions that we've had sent through. For those that we didn't get to answer live, we will put your questions to the panel after the session and get back to you at a later date. And as I said, there'll be a live version of this available to download, and we will also circulate a short survey after the event. So thank you everybody for your time this morning. I hope you found that an interesting discussion, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks very much.